Hey guys, Will here. Today I want to share with you some of the major takeaways I got from reading the book #Girlboss. Her story is very fascinating. If you don't know who this person is, she is a founder and CEO of a business that is over $100 million in worth. What makes her story so fascinating is that she started with close to nothing. She dropped out of community college. She had been fired from a lot of jobs, and she was a bit of a mess. And in about 7 or 8 years, she turned that into this empire, which is very fascinating. And it's a long story, but I want to share with you some of the major takeaways I found. So, a big part of her success came from her finding and working to its core eBay, MySpace, and maybe Craigslist as well. eBay was probably the biggest one. And what I found was just very fascinating. She said that she viewed eBay as a science, and everything was very important, from how you titled your listings. And again, you can see some parallels between other social media platforms. It works for YouTube as well to a certain extent. But she said that she obsessed over this to a point where she ate, drank, and sleep and thought about this in her dreams. So she said the titles of her listings were very important. And again, the underlying takeaway is how important you have to understand the platform you're using and all the little ins and outs of it. So she said that since she was selling vintage, she had to abbreviate everything VTG. And then the rest of the title was a word salad mix of search terms and actual descriptions. So for her, that included stuff like baby doll and Peter Pan, which morphed into different words as times changed. So this went from baby doll to hippie to boho to avant-garde to architecture. By the way, what she was selling was basically this vintage style clothing. And she sort of started initially selling this stuff, repurposing it or just making it better after buying it at a thrift store. And that slowly over time morphed into this business where she was making a lot of money by buying clothes at thrift stores or businesses or houses closing down, places closing down, and then just touching it up, making it better, or reselling it. And she was very, very serious about this. She did a bunch of small things to make it work. From the photo she took, she literally made sure that her photos, her thumbnails stuck out, because she knew that the customers on eBay would just breeze through every single thumbnail. You literally had less than a second to grab that person's attention, which is why it was so important. And so I think that's very important. In addition to that, she utilized what she had. I think this is a very important point. There is that danger of getting too much money to start a business. And there is a certain level of power to having a little bit of money, and just a little bit of money to start your business. Because then you are forced to be very, very creative. And through that creativity sometimes comes enormous efficiency or enormous productivity and results from very little cash put in. And so she was very creative. She had her friends model her clothing, which eventually evolved into her modeling her clothing. And then she had to do all the photography, the lighting, and everything. And that led to her eventually, paying for burgers for some of these models, or you're convincing them to model because it may look good on their portfolio. And it's so interesting seeing her story, because you can take away certain things from this. For instance, back to the eBay listings, she went into great detail to make sure her listings popped. So this goes into customer loyalty, building trust, giving back, and doing the best that you can, even if the results don't show initially. And one way she did this was with the eBay listings. And if you haven't been on eBay, it's basically like an online auction. And she would go into extreme detail in her descriptions, going above and beyond to help her customers. So that meant all the styling tips that she could think of, she would put in the description. And it wasn't spam, it wasn't useless drivel, generic advice. She had all these styling tips for all her outfits, from dresses to hats to leather jackets. And she had every single measurement that you can think of, armpit to armpit, everything. She went above and beyond. And I think that's a huge tenet as well. Napoleon Hill, in his book about the laws of success, one of his laws is do more than you are assigned to do. I think that's so incredible. And it's just interesting seeing how she did this in the digital age. I mean, this is all very recent. This book, I think, it's very fun. It's a very easy read. And there's a lot of pictures in here. And it's very relevant to the audience today because there's a lot of digital examples. I mean, if you went back to 2007 and there are pictures of her from 2007, which wasn't that long ago. That was, what, 8 years ago? That wasn't that long ago. She was literally just getting started then and just trying to piece things together and make it work. I just find that incredible. Here's a picture of her and a model that she didn't pay for. And here's a picture of her because she couldn't afford any models. And slowly this thing grew over time, and her story is just incredibly interesting. She friend requested a lot of people on MySpace to the point where she was breaking those rules illegally and using a robot to request people. And she had it so that she would only request people who were friends of someone who was a very good-looking female. And in addition to that, they had to be living in a certain city with a certain age demographic. And so what she would do was she would program this in, and she would use a CAPTCHA system to avoid the spam detection filter. She really was just trying to make things work, even though she knew she was an amateur. And I've seen this in billionaire Sarah Blakely too, and other entrepreneurs. And what it is this whole concept of, I realize I suck at a lot of these things, so I'm going to try my best to learn as much as I can and do the best job that I can, and then everything else I will, if need be, find someone else to do for me. And so she realized, for instance, that she sucked at Photoshop. In her case, she did her darn best to learn Photoshop. She still sucked at it, but it was enough to get her to the next point. She used Photoshop for her packaging. She sent a little nice letter along with delivering her clothing. And I mean, she really went above and beyond in everything she did. And that it's everything. She packaged things. She made sure everything fit perfectly. She ironed it. She steamed it. She washed the clothing if she just got it from a thrift store. So that's another great lesson. And then the final thing I want to talk about is probably the fact that what she did with her whole thing, she really utilized what she could. And I think now, especially in this digital age, some people say it's dying or it's over, which is completely false. But especially in this day and age, if you are creative and innovative and you research and hustle and you dig and you learn, you can get a lot of free marketing. And again, this goes back to what I said about, if you don't have a lot of money to get started, it can be an advantage rather than a disadvantage. It spurs you to be very creative. Whereas I've seen it, and I'm sure it happens all the time, but people get a lot of venture capital or a lot of money to fund their business, and they get very lazy, they get very inefficient, and they just throw money at things. They're just like, oh, social media marketing. Let's find a company that does it, rather than just research things. And I just find that so essential because I was just listening to a podcast. It was the Smart Passive Income podcast, and they just had a very recent interview about this man who had literally started on Instagram 7 months ago and had grown that from zero all the way up to about 200,000 followers. and he basically imparted some of the big tips that he used to get there, and none of it was unethical or manipulative. It was just very basic stuff that no one ever does. Frequency, content, hashtags, quotes, design, quality, these sorts of things. I mean, there's more to it than that. I'm not gonna like go into detail in this short video, but you get the point. And I think that's so essential. And then the final thing, obviously, is that this woman really she enjoyed what she does. She was passionate about it. And at the same time, I mean, again, you see this as such a common thread throughout. I literally just listened to 2 interviews from that podcast I just mentioned. And both of the people said that they loved their work and there's something they're passionate about. The man who said that actually said that he really never had to work in his entire life because he never viewed his work as work, which is quite fascinating. I don't think that's necessary because, again, we have a lot of different interpretations of follow your passion, which, again, I don't want to get too in-depth on that in this video. I have other videos dedicated to that. But I think it's very interesting. And, of course, she worked very hard. She obsessed over it to the point where this was her life. This brand was her life. And it also went back to a huge thing, which was she stumbled across the fact that she was providing a lot of value for free, which is a very important thing. She was doing that without her even realizing it. So her main sort of landing site or ground site, whatever you want to call it, her main website was her MySpace page with her 60,000 friends. And on that site, every day she was posting new clothing that was unique. And in addition to that clothing, she would either post styling tips or she would almost always post photos of a model with the entire outfit. And she styled everything from the jacket to the necklace and so forth. I mean, if you look at some of these pictures, she literally styled everything and it looks very fashionable, really. And her clothing was considered vintage clothing, which pretty much means like a decade, like old clothing, like 80s clothing or 90s clothing. But you can kind of see here that she really styled these things. And over time, she found that a lot of her friends were checking on her MySpace every week before they went out as inspiration and as styling tips to use for themselves. And that was a free process. And she sort of realized that and over-delivered on her eBay listings as well by listing all this special styling things that you can put with this specific outfit and so forth. And there you go again. And I've seen this time and time again, but it's definitely the case with her. But especially in this digital age, I see a lot with online businesses. You see these things, and she made it seem like this was a huge corporation, or at least a big corporation. And in her letters, the ones she would ship with her clothing, she would say stuff like, "We hope you enjoy our clothing as much as we do," even though it was a one-woman operation for the most part. Like, eventually she hired a photographer, but she was doing almost everything herself. She was the model in that. And I just found that very fascinating. And no, she was not some supermodel who was good looking, that had it good from the start. I think that's a huge assumption that's oftentimes false. This girl was, for most of her life until, she started this, which was in her early 20s, after dropping out of community college, dumpster diving, petty thievery, shoplifting, getting fired from a lot of jobs. She was like your normal girl. She rented a apartment which she lived in with a bunch of other musicians. She was like your average girl who wasn't that pretty and so forth. Nowadays, obviously, she looks kind of pretty given her, money and her style and everything. But I guess that's a good lesson too. You can kind of look more attractive in time with money and style and grooming and so forth. So don't give up hope if you're ugly, guys. And finally, I guess the last thing I want to say, I know I've been rambling on and on, but again, it's just it's such an interesting book. The last thing I want to say is that this girl, she definitely worked really hard, and I think a lot of business people can take this the wrong way, and this definitely doesn't apply to just business. This applies to life in general. She worked and obsessed about her brand, and this didn't happen to her, but I really need to say this because it occurred to another entrepreneur that I was listening in on her interview, and I really think that it's so important to stress for anyone who's still stuck around to watch this video. Hopefully it may help you. And long story short, what she said, basically this was a woman who was making a tremendous amount of money. But here was the problem. She couldn't stop. She couldn't, rest. She couldn't take a break, and she had to keep going. It was some type of mental thing, and she was already making so much money, but she couldn't stop. It was just like, once we finish this project, we'll finally settle down, or we'll finally go on vacation. And she never did. And the thing was, she didn't view that in a healthy way. She was resentful and angry when she saw other people who were relaxing or enjoying themselves or having fun. And again, you don't have to be rich to experience that type of mindset. I've had some similar mindsets, and I've seen people with similar mindsets, and it's this basic level of, it's not uncommon, it's this like resentment towards whatever. This person seems to have so much fun, or this person seems to have a greater life, or I can't believe that person gets to relax or do this when I can't. How come that person can't when I can't? Or whatever else. And so she took this kind of far, and eventually she came to terms with it. She finally settled down. She finally took some time off her business, which was her passion for it was kind of fizzling out. And I think that's very important. All this activity is not necessarily a good thing. Activity for the sake of activity, as a few entrepreneurs say, is not good, especially if it's really not getting you anywhere. So I think that's very important too. You still have to have a certain level of chill and relaxed attitude. I was skimming through, I can't say I read, but I skimmed through this really thick book. It was called The Okinawa Way. It was about some of the longest living people on earth. They lived into their hundreds, and they are a Japanese tribe still to existence to its day, and they live in a very traditional type way. And one of the things that was very common and unique about them was how they were just very chill about things. They took things very slow, and their schedules were not so fast-paced and busy, and there was no concept of coming in late for things. And I do think, I've heard a bit of advice from nutritionists and health experts on how stress and negative energy and negative emotions has a obviously negative impact on your longevity, how long you live, how happy you are, and your health, and your probability of developing illnesses. And in this case, I think it's very true. So sometimes, you get caught up in this self-development world, and you're just like, I gotta do this, I gotta do that. And sometimes it's good to chill and relax. That's all I gotta say. See you later. Thanks for watching. Peace. Hey everyone, so today I want to talk about another common trait I found with successful, wealthy individuals. Some people take it to a almost sickening level. Some of them include Bill Gates, Elon Musk, founders,